room, just so I'm not interrupted. If people, I assume people will probably join for the next
Okay, no
couple
problem.
minutes.
I'll do that.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for coming together today. Today is really a celebration. Bruce Dohrenwend touched so many of our lives, our research, our approach to mentorship, our approach to training. And really, what we want to do today is just share our reflections of our time with Bruce, and share how his legacy has impacted all of our work. I have the privilege of kind of being the MC today, as the current director of the psychiatric epidemiology training program that Bruce started in 1972. And so, just a few logistics before we get started. We have a really incredible list of people who are going to share their reflections today. So much so that we only have 5 minutes each to kind of talk about Bruce and his legacy on our work. And I'll kind of be emceeing the run of show a little bit here. So just because we have so many people, please, be mindful of time. If people start to run over a little bit, I will very gently remind you that we need to move on to more speakers. So just please be aware that it's not personal, but we have a lot of people who want to speak today, and we want to hear from everyone. Um, so with that, I don't think there's any other logistics that I need to mention. With that, I'll just kind of kick things off and set the stage a little bit. And then, as we go through our speakers, they're kind of organized in terms of thematic areas, eras of Pet, colleagues of Bruce. But also there were people who had time constraints. So there are some people who are kind of off schedule from where they are in the timeline of Bruce's contributions at Columbia. So just keep that in mind. It's a loose organization of timeline. But I will just start. I have just a few slides to share. And I'm going to start by talking about the history of PET at Columbia that we all know so well. So everybody knows that, Bruce started PET in 1972. And I also wanted to just highlight the contribution of the psychiatric epidemiology course that so many of us took and participated in. So we think, and I confirmed this with Bruce Link, so he can tell me if I'm wrong, several years ago, but we think that Bruce Dohrenwend taught the Psych Epi course from about 1972 to 1988. Then it was taken over by Bruce Link, who took the course from Bruce D in 1974 and served as the director of the Psychiatric Epidemiology Training Program from 1996 to 2015. Then there was Ezra Susser, who also took the course from Bruce Dohrenwend in 1985 and served as the director of the Psychiatric Epidemiology Training Program from 2015 to 2019 and taught Psych Epi with me from 2016 to 2019. I had the privilege, and I had this picture because I'm kind of side-eyeing Bruce Link here as the ever skeptic student. I took the course from Bruce Link in 2004, and I TA'd the course in 2010, and then I've served as the director of the Psychiatric Epidemiology Training Program since 2019. So among these four directors, I also want to point out that this program could not have existed without our exceptional co-directors, starting with co-director Sharon Schwartz, who also served as the program coordinator, the training program coordinator for many, many years. And this program would not exist today without Sharon's instrumental contributions across the years. And then also more recently by co-directors, including Mark Olfson from psychiatry, who's just been a wonderful colleague and mentor through the years. So I cribbed these slides from slides in Bruce Link's psychiatric epidemiology course slides to just set the stage a little bit by talking about the Columbia approach, as we call it, that Bruce Dohrenwend really pioneered. The Columbia approach is that we focus on population-based samples and studies. Within that, a lot of our work is predicated on the choice of an important and well-motivated research problem. And we talk a lot in the PET training program about what it means to have an important question and what kinds of questions are well-motivated. This includes the development of a theoretical explanation, an account of how phenomena of interest came to be, and then uses the theoretical explanation to generate multiple predictions using if-then statements. If my theory is correct, I should observe this. If it's not correct, I should observe something else. So you want conflict in your theory. You want to find things where the theory would have conflicting predictions and that the findings would then elaborate the theory. These theories make predictions about facts. When you do a study to test whether or not an explanation is in accord with the facts, the explanation loses credibility if its predictions are incorrect and gains credibility if they're right. And this is what leads to what both Bruce Dohrenwend and Bruce Link talked about extensively when we were all PET fellows, and we tried to preserve that legacy of having a risky test, a test that is strong enough that it sharply reduces the credibility of the theory's if the theory's prediction is wrong, and increases if it's correct. And so I think throughout the day, we'll be hearing about a lot of risky tests that Bruce Dohrenwend helped to facilitate. And then just by the numbers, this is just the long arm of Bruce's reach of establishing this program so many years ago. By our count, we have directly trained 188 psychiatric epidemiology training fellows, both doctoral students and postdocs, and then hundreds more who have learned from all of us in the program who've taken the PsychEpi course. By our estimation, about 70% of those fellows have gone on to research careers, facilitated by the training they received at Columbia. And we have counted, we think, over 7,000 published papers by the fellows in our training program, which is roughly about 50 peer-reviewed publications per fellow, which is an incredible contribution to the literature. Many are leaders in the field of psychiatric epidemiology and in many fields as well. And so we think about this branching tree of mentorship legacy, that really there are thousands of scholars working today, both in the US and in many other countries, whose lives have been touched and whose research careers have been touched by Bruce Dohrenwend and the legacy of this program. So I'll just close, but this is what we put in our last training grant of the Foundations of Psychiatric Epidemiology Training at Columbia, that we focus on theory and hypothesis-driven scientific inquiry, those risky tests, high-stakes research and falsification. We do that by looking at multi-level dynamic causation, and a great example of that is, of course, Mervyn and Ezra's theoretical framework on echo-epidemiology. We focus on methods for prediction and causal inference. We provide training in the counterfactual and potential outcomes approaches. And all of this is in service of responding to public health challenges. And throughout the years, those challenges have ebbed and flowed in terms of what are the current mental health challenges facing different populations, both in the US and abroad. And so we always try to keep on top of what the current challenges facing different populations are. And all of it is undergirded with training in research and ethical principles that underpin working with disadvantaged populations, including people living with mental illness. Everyone here probably knows that in March of this year, our funding from NIMH was terminated. This is not due to cause, it is due to the federal actions against Columbia University. But I just want to state that our mission is not diminished. We will continue to train people in psychiatric epidemiology at Columbia as long as we are at Columbia. Anyone who needs and wants training in this field will get it. And we will continue to make sure that Bruce D's legacy is ever present in all of our training at Columbia. Our funding model might look different, but our commitment remains. So with that, I'd like to turn the mic to Bruce Link, former PET director and longtime colleague.
I titled my comments Bruce Dohrenwend's gift. One of the items in Bruce's psychiatric epidemiology research interview asked something like, "Do you hear voices other people can't hear?" Well, I do. And before all the clinicians pull out their checklists to consider the possibility of my break with reality, let me explain. I'm referring to Bruce Dohrenwend, always speaking to me in many ways for sure, but certainly every time I turn my mental activity to a research issue. And his speaking to me happens a lot. In terms of the response categories of the instruments Bruce developed, it happens very often, not fairly often, sometimes, almost never, never, very often. And you know what? I've retained enough of my New York chutzpah out here in sunny California uh, to declare that I'm not alone in this voice hearing thing. We share it. For any one of you who fully engaged in in the pet experience, for any one of you who sat directly opposite Bruce at that venerable pet seminar table on the day you somehow ratcheted up the courage to present your work, I bet you have it too. In fact, I think it's a bedrock of that secret pet handshake that I talked about before. It's that I know that you know that I know that you know kind of thing that we experience at an event like this or when we meet after not seeing one another for too long. It's that collective, we get the pet experience feeling. But what exactly is this thing that I see as a big part of the pet secret handshake? There's enormous admiration we carry for Bruce for what he accomplished in his own research, for his unwavering support of a training program that produced such a broad swath of really amazing talent and accomplishment. But what I want to focus on is that quotidian thing, that thing that is with me very often. We would probably each come up with slightly different things Bruce might be saying to us, different cautions, different aphorisms, different pithy statements. But I would venture to guess that they all push for picking a research question that matters, for creating a strategy to move knowledge forward, and executing a plan to address the question with maximum rigor of design, measurement, and analysis. Bruce would be saying, figure out what needs to be done to actually resolve the issue. And if you might want to wiggle around or obfuscate a tough issue, don't even think of it. Remember, I'm forever at the other end of that seminar table, and I'll know what you're up to. So just do everything that's humanly possible to get it right. And one way to think about this is a beautiful instantiation of the scientific method in an ongoing dialogue between Bruce, internalized in our minds, and each of us. It works so well because of how deeply Bruce's rigorous approach was embedded within him. It was a lifelong project, a way of being in the world for him. And we all saw that, and wanting to benefit from it let him into our consciousness. We knew it would help us make us better. And so for me, right here, right now, I want to reflect on what a great gift it's been and continues to be for me. There was the red two-wheeler I got for Christmas when I was 5, for the Don Hope baseball glove I got at 10. Yeah, huge. But if you look back across your lifespan and to the gifts you've received, what Bruce has given us is massive. Bruce, thank you for the gift. Keep talking.
Thanks, Bruce. Next, we'll hear from Ezra Sesser.
Hi,
Ezra.
everyone. Um, yeah, you can hear me? Okay. Yeah, it's amazing just to look at all the people here, that is remarkable in itself. So many brilliant people that he inspired, and trained. And I know that there are certain things that you all know about Bruce, like his brilliance, the way, his integrity, the kind of way he asked questions that Bruce L was just talking about. And I also felt those things he had a huge influence on me. But I thought I'd talk about something that was different. It would just have 5 minutes, that like he was always a big influence on me, but it changed in the last 10 or 15 years. That's when I kind of became closer to him, strangely enough, and had more kind of personal interactions with him. And I came to see that You know, he was a very loving person. I mean, I'm sure I don't have to tell Kathy that or his relatives, but that became like so evident to me. And the way that he would stand up for people, he did that for me on several occasions, you know, when I was in trouble. And that time I was in his kind of unit, if you like, you know, in those last years. And um, he always stood up for me and for the other people in the unit, um, for what he thought was right, you know, not for things that we did that he thought were wrong. But, you know, he would not allow us to be abused or intimidated by people in authority. I thought that was something really special, and it was loving, you know. And I'm sure I kind of miss him right now, you know, because I know that he would be standing up right now to everything that's going on. He'd be an inspiration, you know. And so I think of him a lot these days. And I guess I've used up my 5 minutes, but I just want to say it was beyond all these intellectual things he had. I, I don't know if it probably it was always there, but I saw it, you know, in the last 10 or 15 ways in this way that really touched me. So that's my part. And hi, Bruce L.
Thanks so much, Ezra. Mary Claire Lennon?
Hi, good morning. I'm happy to see so many familiar faces and names. It's a lovely tribute to Bruce. I've known Bruce for half a century now, and because I became part of the Pet family in the early 70s, the mid 70s, and returned again and again, and eventually was on the faculty of Pet. And a number of us in Pet, in early days, there were mainly sociologists in the program. And the women primarily were all feminist sociologists. And we took on the mantle of studying gender and mental health. And we took as our inspiration something that Bruce and Barbara Dohrenwend had written in 1969, was that it seems that men and women have different styles in responding to stress. And a number of us from different perspectives looked at that question empirically. It turned out that this was not a welcome intervention in the sociology of mental health, the areas in which we worked. People were very annoyed at the idea that maybe men might have some issues themselves. And because the prevailing paradigm was that women suffered from mental illness because of the social roles they were in, and that men somehow were immune. And at presenting some of this work at conferences, we got some kind of nasty, angry, and disdainful comments. But we were all trained by Bruce, and we knew that our research was solid. And eventually, our colleagues came along, maybe 10 or 20 years later, and you would think they invented the idea themselves. Throughout my time at Columbia and beyond, Bruce has been an important advocate and support. When I prepared my first NIMH grant, it was on gender responses to work stress. And I had to write that paragraph at the end about the policy implications. And I hadn't a clue about what would be practical about this work. So I asked Bruce, and he took out a proposal that he had written and was funded recently with a very lovely paragraph about policy implications. And he said, "Here, copy this." And I did, and was funded on the first go round. Catherine already laid out a nice description of Bruce's approach to methods, which made a large impact on me. And it's also the way in which I teach research methods and statistics, which I've been doing for 40 years. Especially looking at causal inference, which again in sociology took a little time to settle in as a area of research. But what I'd like to emphasize in this short time I have is the communities that Bruce created through the PET program. Over the years, I've collaborated with a number of people on this call, including people not on the call, Sarah Rosenfield, Bruce Link, Sharon Schwartz, Alex Zoutra, and the late John Martin. And these collaborations worked because we shared an approach to research. I've also developed very long-lasting friendships with other PET fellows, and they've lasted to this day. Both friendships that are connected to the work that we do, but also connected to the people that we are. And they wouldn't have arisen without the fruitful environment that PET created. I'd like to also mention one PET-related friendship that I've developed, which is with Kathy Douglas, who founded an organization to provide free legal services for women who were low income. And Bruce was on the board of the organization, introduced me to Kathy, and she and I conducted some research on the clients of the organization, which was a very practical and policy-oriented and gratifying application of my research skills. So I'd just like to note that Bruce's legacy is apparent in all these little boxes that I see in front of me on the screen, and also beyond that in the work that people have communicated to their students, and that our students have communicated to those of us who are old enough to the next generation. And I appreciate that legacy. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Next on our list is John DeFigueiredo. Saying that right. John? Oh, you're on.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for asking me to join this tribute to Bruce Dohrenwend. Sometimes we are lucky in life, and many years ago, I was a young graduate student who was about to graduate with the degree of Doctor of Science at Johns Hopkins. I applied to various programs. I was accepted to the PET program at Columbia. My advisor was Dr. Paul Lemkow, and I remember how delighted I was and how happy Lemkow was. He told me what a great honor it was to be able to work with Bruce and Barbara Dohrenwend. He compared them to the Pierre and Marie Curie, a couple, inspiring others to do important fundamental research in our field. That year in New York at Columbia was one of the best of my professional life. Bruce was a wonderful teacher. He instigated in me several things that I kept in mind every time I wrote a proposal or wrote a paper or made a presentation. First, the rigor in methodology. Look at every single angle of the problem. Look at possible alternative hypotheses. Come up with something that's really good and elegant. And be careful, because I may just stumble upon something and not know that I'm doing that. And so I learned quite a bit from him. And that year, I developed friendships with my colleagues who were so wonderful and so cooperative. It was like a big family. And I really enjoyed that year immensely. So I wrote back to Dr. Lemkow that this was one of the best things that ever happened to me, is to come here to Columbia to do what I'm doing. In every lecture, he pointed out not just what we needed to do, but also how we got there. The history of ideas, the concepts, the struggles that we had to figure out the solutions to the problems we were facing. Also from the practical point of view about grant writing and what the reviewers might expect, and also about the professional papers that we submit, and taught us to place ourselves in the position of the reviewer and just kind of look at from a distance and not be too carried over by our enthusiasm for what we are doing, and hold an unbiased view of our methodologies, our results, And in our discussion, always give credit to previous work and all the other scientists who have been working on the same problem and highlight what's new about what you're doing. These basic concepts accompanied me throughout my career and helped me a great deal. I also learned a lot from my colleagues and the work that they were doing and enjoyed immensely and still maintain the relationships with many of my colleagues in the PET program, even to this date. For all of this, I'm immensely grateful to Bruce Dohrenwend for admitting me to the program, inspiring me. He has been a source of inspiration and encouragement, and he will always be like that. So thank you, Bruce, for all that you have done for us. We will remember you always. And thank you, Catherine, for asking me to join you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Debbie Hassan?
Hi. Well, this is amazing, Carrie. Thank you so much for putting this all together. Um, when thinking about what to say, I don't know that I would have ended up in psychiatric epidemiology at all if it hadn't been for Bruce Dohrenwend. I was at Yale working as a clinician diagnostic interviewer for a family study that Myrna Weissman was conducting, and I was real interested in the work that I was doing, but I was not sure that I don't really think I thought about this as a career. But I was becoming friends with Judy Richmond, who we're going to hear from a little bit later, who was doing a postdoc at Yale after completing a pre-doc in PET earlier. And Judy and I were friends. And Judy told me, there's this researcher, Bruce Dohrenwend, who's going to give grand rounds at Yale. And he's really neat. You should really come hear this grand rounds. And so I went. And, Bruce was so intellectually exciting, but his presentation manner wasn't the most dynamic in the world, It was very sort of careful. But despite that manner, he talked about the Hutterites, this community, and he talked about measurement issues, and he talked about issues of the importance of populations. And I got so excited at this grand rounds. I said, yes, this is the field for me. And I just became terrifically excited. And so I finished out that academic year working as an interviewer. And then I started taking courses as a part-time student in public health. I took the reading seminar that Bruce was teaching, which was so exciting. And it was I cannot convey how exciting that course was. And I love the fact that he gave us assignments of doing mock grant proposals, that got us started in thinking about those issues. And he gave us such good, thoughtful feedback. And the seminars were so exciting. And then I was admitted as a PET fellow. And the whole experience was intellectually exciting and energizing. And, of course, it was inspirational to me to go on in the areas that I've focused on, which has been substance use and substance use disorders and how that intersects with psychiatric disorders. I'm grateful for the PET model of mentoring, which has helped me mentor and which, in the end inspired me to get my own training program, which is like a sort of sister program to PET. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as PET, but it has provided a place for people to focus on substance issues in epidemiology in the School of Public Health at Columbia. And PET provided a wonderful network of colleagues that I've worked with over the years and friends and mentees. So it's just really hard to convey how important Bruce was in all of this. When I was thinking about this a little bit, I realized that at the time I was a PET fellow, the PET program was only 9 years old. I sort of had the idea at the time and since then that PET was there forever, and we certainly know now that nothing is there forever. But it has just been there over the years, and Bruce's impact on my own work and the work of all the other people on this Zoom meeting and others as well is just it can't It's just, it can't be overstated. So I just wanted to join in with this tribute to Bruce. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Debbie. Next, we have Anna Abreda-Lanza.
Hi, good morning. I think I'm a little bit out of sequence
You're
due
out of sequence.
to schedule conflicts, and it turned out I probably will be able to stay till the end. But thank you so much for this opportunity to participate in this tribute to magnificent Bruce Dohrenwend. I remember when I was first accepted into the PET program, I was a little bit starstruck. I was like, oh my goodness, Bruce Dohrenwend, the stress icon. How is this possible? I'm in this amazing program. And it was just such a magnificent and beautiful experience from day one throughout my entire experience in the program. So, why I was surprised that I was accepted, I was like, am I really interested in psychiatric epi? I was really interested in the association between physical and mental health. And at the time, Bruce was also very interested in that. And so I was very fortunate that when I started in the program, Bruce was assigned as one of my primary mentors, in addition to Bruce L. But mostly I work with Bruce Dohrenwend. And I remember when we had a wonderful group that worked together, me, Blake Turner, Daisy Engmack, and Bruce, of course. And I came across this finding in the literature known as the Latino epidemiologic paradox. And I went to Bruce and I said, Bruce, despite lower socioeconomic status, there's evidence that Latinos have lower mortality, which of course goes against so many findings in the literature. And I remember he looked at me and he said, how can that be? And I said, Bruce, I don't know. That's why it's a paradox. So he says, maybe it's selection, the selection effect. And I said, possibly it's selection, or maybe there's other reasons why this could happen. And so we started thinking of alternative explanations following, as Carrie pointed out, and as Bruce Link pointed out, the sort of pet way of exploring problems and paradoxes. Well, one thing led to the next. We had a great team that worked on this problem. And I remember at some point, I came across an opportunity to apply for a grant to help study this paradox. Well, the name of the grant was the Latina Junior Faculty Research and Mentoring Grant from the Social Science Research Council. But at the time, I was a postdoc, and so Columbia would not allow you to apply as a PI for a grant. So I go to Bruce and I said, Bruce, there's this great opportunity, this Latina Research and Mentoring Grant, but I can't apply as the PI. So you're going to have to apply as the PI and I'll be a co-investigator. And he looked at me with this look of disbelief. And he says to me, but Anna, I am not in the practice of being PI on other people's ideas. I said, Bruce, I know, but if you don't put yourself down as a PI, we're not going to be able to apply for the grant. So he reluctantly agreed to put himself down as the PI. And I'm just so grateful that he did, because we got the award. We wrote this wonderful paper together, and that led to other grants down the road. So it was just so many wonderful memories of how Bruce would go about doing the work and helping us all think strategically about big problems and how to address them, because obviously some of these issues are very difficult to study. So that was just such a fond memory I have of him. And then, as was shared by other colleagues, I feel that just the whole Bruce as a mentor, the fact that PET existed. We were such a close, wonderful cohort. That really got in my bones and in my spirit and in my way of being. And I felt like I really wanted to move that forward. And when I was very privileged to have a position in at Columbia as a junior faculty member in the Department of Socio-Medical Sciences. And I came across this opportunity to apply for the IMSD program, Initiative for Maximizing Student, at the time, diversity, but now it's development. Unfortunately, the program doesn't exist anymore, but it followed the PET model of having a mentor and a cohort and a group of people that really cared about important issues. And I remember at the time, Sharon Schwartz even gave me a copy of the PET grant so that I could model the philosophy after PET. And it was just such a wonderful experience all around. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to share how PET got in my bones and in my being and how I carry that forward. And I just want to end with a quote because it really does epitomize for me PET and Bruce and my experiences. And I just felt Maya Angelou, that I've learned in life that people will forget what you said and people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So thank you so much for making me feel so valued and like I really belonged. And just thank you again, Pat and Bruce. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And just a note on timeline, we're now kind of moving into the 80s in terms of PET fellows who were starting around that time, although again, we'll have some people from previous cohorts who will go later. So, but our loose timeline is now moving into the 80s. And with that, Karen Raphael is our next speaker.
Me? Oh, okay, there we go. Hi, 5 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to bring you back to 84, about 40 years ago. And I was really nervous and because I was about to go for an interview for a postdoc position in the PET program. Did I really know what psychiatric epidemiology was? Sort of. I learned pretty quickly, but I remember first having an interview, very pleasant, with Bruce Link, and then I had a break before my interview with Bruce Dohrenwend was scheduled. Now, I had read some of his writings, some of his publications, but I thought maybe I needed to know a little more. So I made my way over to the library at Psychiatric Institute, the old building, and I saw immediately this shelf on which all these books written by scientists from Psychiatric Institute were shelved. And hey, there's a couple of books here which Bruce edited. And I was going to meet him, so I figured, let me take a look. And I picked one up and I paged through it. And I think it was Stressful Life Events in Their Context. Now, this is really the first time I put my hands on a book written by Bruce Dohrenwend and obviously edited also with Barbara Dohrenwend. And I was reading about these alternative models and mediators of the relationship between stress and negative health outcomes, and pretty interesting, right? So this is somewhat new to me, right? So about an hour later, it was time for me to be interviewed by Bruce. So I knocked on Bruce's door. Everybody remember what Bruce's office on Haven Avenue looked like? Okay. Well, I peeked in, and this is really the very first time I had seen Bruce. So I saw this very gentle-looking man whose desk was covered with high piles of papers, right? It not only looked messy to somebody else, but I somehow got the feeling that he knew what was in every single pile, how high up or how low, okay? And he spoke very softly, as he always did, almost shyly, okay? Very deceptive, a deceptively easy manner. But underneath it, right away, you could feel that uncompromising, and razor sharp intellect. Now, I don't honestly remember too many details about the interview, but at some point, Bruce asked me whether I knew anything about mediators or moderators of the relationship between stressful life events and negative health outcomes. So I had this very recent graphic in my head, and I somehow got through that interview with a reasonable amount of stress, enough so that I was admitted as a postdoc. And I just thank the goddess for libraries that was there on my side that day. So that was my personal academic history. So through happenstance, I mean, it was an incredible experience. Sharon Schwartz was my colleague who we went through postdoc together at the same time. There were just so many other wonderful people that I think are on this call and some who aren't. But through happenstance, I lost touch with him for a long time. I left Washington Heights and I went to Rutgers, Newark, New Jersey Medical School, and my work extended into chronic pain, but it was very much informed by framework that Bruce gave me, competing hypotheses, extending from clinical to community-based work. But after I hadn't seen him then for really a long time, but so many of you were at toward the end of 2021. We had an online Zoom meeting to celebrate Bruce's retirement, and it was our first contact with him in a really long time. But after his Zoom retirement get together, Bruce contacted me. Now, he wanted to talk about a diagnosis that I revealed that I had and that he had at that retirement meeting, disease, which I'll shorten for time's sake as PD. So both my intellectual father, who was Bruce, and my biological father had it, as well as me. And first we corresponded by email. And I remember in my response to his first email, I had an opportunity to tell him one-on-one what some of the issues were that he really brought to me, like this incredible family of intellectual power that still surrounds me, that he nurtured and networked. And it's a family with many branches, as his mentees had their own mentees. So Bruce's influence goes way, way beyond what we see here, and including the people we don't see, but even people we've never met. But then Bruce asked for a little bit of my help, as unbelievable as it seemed. How could I help Bruce? Well, he asked me, I've been living 15 years, now it's 15 years with Parkinson's, and did I have any insights that might help him? Me help Bruce? Astounding. Well, this very private and very reserved man opened up to me about his pain and his frustration. And during our Zoom meetings, Kathy sat by side, off screen, listening to everything, copying down everything that might have been relevant. And this kind of contact continued through scattered Zoom meetings and emails until a couple of months before his death. I am just overflowing with gratitude for everything Bruce taught me and gave me, and finally for his trust in me to share a very personal part of him. Parkinson's is a condition that is designed to literally trip up a person who is so used to being in control and precise, a creature with well-honed habits, from repetitive and predictable lunch meals. I think it was tuna salad, Graham, if I remember correctly. I don't know if that continued, and a firm dedication to exercise. Now, for everything that we shared and didn't share, I celebrate Bruce's life as a mentor, as a groundbreaking research scientist, and as a person living with a health-altering life event that no amount of social support could ever really make okay. I think about him constantly, every single day. And foolishly, I'm still waiting for that next Zoom meeting with him. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Elan, Mark?
Thank you, Carrie. This is so wonderful to be here. It was with a sense of nostalgia and great reverence that I sat down to write a few thoughts about Bruce. It immediately became clear to me that to me, Bruce was Pat and Pat was Bruce, in that Bruce has imprinted his own personality on Pat and how I had experienced it, not only when he was Pat director, but at least in my mind, and it sounds like others from today's here meeting, his legacy continues to date. So this is a story about Bruce, but also Pat and Bruce L., Sharon, Ezra, and Carrie. My work and why I came to Colombia was possible because of Bruce's student and my mentor, the late John Martin. In my memory of Bruce the person, there was always something quiet and dignified and deliberate about him. Whether I remember him sitting at his desk in his very unassuming office on the 19th floor in the towers on Haven Avenue, or sitting with his lunch at the pet seminar table, or even swimming in the pool where I sometimes saw him, sometimes because I wasn't as consistent making it there as he was at lunchtime. Of course, my most important memories of Bruce relate to his scholarship, which had an incredible impact on my career and continue to. I came to PET in 1987 as a pre-doc with some knowledge about stress. As a psychology student, I understood stress as a personal process. It was Bruce's work that taught me about social stress through his early work on poverty and class. It was also Bruce's questions and comments at PET seminars through which I learned important lessons. For example, when I first presented at PET, and it was a petrifying experience to present at PET as a pre-doc, I presented about what later became minority stress. Yes, I've been doing this for 40 years almost. I studied the stress of homophobia, but I was quick to say that LGBT people, I think we used to say gay people, were as healthy as heterosexual, because that was in the late 80s what we learned in psychology, a remnant of the 1970s debate on classifying homosexuality as a mental disorder, and the affirmative stance was to deny that gay people have mental disorders. After I presented, Bruce asked me a simple question. How is it possible? If LGBT people have more stress, why don't they have more disorders? Today, that question seems so obvious, but it was an aha moment for me, a moment to understand epi and population health. Bruce's question sent me thinking about and then questioning the then received view about the health of LGBT populations. Of course, now we know about health disparities, but it took another decade till about 2000 to see research evidence that confirmed my ideas and coalesced with Bruce's question. Yes, LGBT people have more stress related to prejudice and stigma. And yes, in fact, they do have more mental and other disorders resulting from this stress. In another long-term influence, as a student in an EP2 paper, I applied Bruce's two-step recruitment strategy in the Israel study to study LGBT people. It seemed like a great solution to the challenge of how to get a probability sample of LGBT people. First, screen the entire population and identify LGBT people, and then administer the survey you're interested in to the people who are eligible, that is, the LGBT people. I finally was able to get this study funded. It's a very expensive approach to sampling. We had to screen almost 500,000 people in the United States. But 25 years later, I did the study that I wrote about in that EPI paper. But it wasn't just Bruce's work and ideas, it was his demeanor and attitude or approach to being a social scientist that most strongly affected me. His dedication to his ideas, his commitment to finding the truth using the scientific methods, his patience to get the right answer regardless of personal cost, and his sometimes stubborn refusal to compromise, his conscientiousness. I hope I had embodied some of this some of the time in my own work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilan. Sharon, you're on mute.
So, in the past few weeks since Bruce died, I've had the unrelenting and nagging feeling that I have unfinished business with him. So, reflecting on the time since I first met Bruce and looking in hindsight at the end of my career, I see many influences that I somehow overlooked in real time. Most of the connecting threads in my work come from him. And there are so many questions I want to ask him, revisiting old debates, asking him if we've done justice to his research legacy. But perhaps most strongly, I feel that I never really thanked him sufficiently for everything he had done for me. So Bruce shaped my career even before I met him. My dissertation was an attempt in the area that Mary Claire was talking about to adjudicate a debate from the early 70s between Govan Tudor and Bruce about sex differences in psychiatric disorder. So my doctoral degree depended on Bruce's work, and I'm grateful for that. But first and foremost, I'm grateful to Bruce for creating PET. My intellectual home since I was a PET fellow as a postdoc. And as Ilan said, Bruce was PET and PET was Bruce. And I still think of myself as a PET fellow. PET is a special place, a space where you can test out ideas, get criticism, harsh criticism at times, but remain confident that your ideas get sharpened, your argument tightened at every presentation. And one of my fondest memories of PET exemplifies this spirit. So Ilan and I presented on a paper that we wrote on the impact of within and between group analyses on tests of the social stress hypothesis. So we used, the PET approach to examine a central tenet of social stress theory, that disadvantaged social status exposes people to more stressful conditions, and this in turn causes mental health problems. Ilan and I in this paper argued that conceptual and methodological problems in the literature threaten our ability to draw conclusions about social stress theory, essentially due to misinterpretations of within and between group analyses. When I read our conclusion in this paper, totally in line with the PET approach, it astonishes me, not because I think it was wrong, but because it was so chutzpahdik. The English equivalents of impertinent and imprudent do not express it quite well enough. But we concluded holding on to a theoretical perspective without sufficient evidence leads to stagnation in science because a theory that cannot be mortally endangered cannot be a lie. So after our talk, there were questions, but Bruce D. remained silent. So Bruce L., who was a training coordinator at that time, asked him if he wanted to say something. And Bruce D. said, "I have already spoken to them about why they are wrong." And then he proceeded to critique our work. This was harsh criticism. But because this was PET, and because this was Bruce D., the exchange was intellectually enriching and engaging. Indeed, many of the PET fellows commented afterwards that this was one of their favorite seminars. Why? Because we were not afraid that Bruce would make a personal argument or think less of us, because Bruce was treating us as worthy interlocutors. It was hard to hear, but it was so exhilarating. Don't get me wrong, I was often afraid of Bruce, and I think I was not alone in this. It took me 2 years in the program before I could call him by his first name. But the reason for this was not fear of anger or something, but, and Ilan used exactly the right word, because of reverence. This reverence and the value of learning are encapsulated in another fond memory. Marion Rafe and I completed a set of critical analyses for Bruce's Israel study. The results did not support Bruce's hypotheses. We double and triple checked the results, but to no avail. So Marion and I were afraid to tell Bruce. In fact, at the next meeting, we lied to him and said that we had not completed the analysis, which was only postponing the inevitable. So finally, when we showed him the results, I asked timidly, "So, Bruce, how do you feel about this?" And Bruce said, "Feel about it, Sharon? Feel about it? I feel educated." And indeed, that was a gift he gave us. You will be wrong sometimes, but that simple sentence supported how the scientific method worked. You test your theory, sometimes you'll be wrong, you learn from it. But on the other hand, Bruce's example also taught that when you have done due diligence, you're convinced you are right, you know a better, more valid way to do things, you've listened to all the arguments to the best of your ability, then don't be swayed by being alone in your stance. Persevere, work hard, find better measures, better experiments, better arguments. Stand with your values. These are amazing lessons, but I did not fully realize or appreciate how integral they were to my work and how they shaped my aspirations. So the chance to thank Bruce is sadly past, but I hope to carry his lessons with me and to the best of my ability, pass them on as a belated thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Blake? Is Blake here?
Hi. It took me a while to find the mute button. Excuse my voice. When I first met Bruce, it was at my parents' breakfast table. The year was 1984. I know I don't look that old, I know. Bruce was there because my father had invited him to the University of Western Ontario to give a talk, which he would do later that afternoon. I wasn't living there at the time, but I decided to drop by for breakfast to meet this great man who I'd read so much about and read much of his work. When I came in, he wasn't talking about his research. He was talking about the PET program. He was talking about how it was structured and the opportunities it provided for pre- and postdoctoral fellows and the accomplished scholars it had produced in the preceding 12 years. The opportunities are so attractive, he said, that we almost always get who we want to come. Almost always, he said, and shot me a look. You see, I just turned down an offer for a pre-doctoral fellowship at PET to go to the University of Michigan. I know, stupid, right? Fortunately, many years later, I got another opportunity to come, this time as a postdoc, and of course, it was the best thing that I ever did. Early on, when I arrived, some fellows who've been there for a while warned me about Bruce's acerbic tongue during PET seminars. He always sits in the same place opposite the speaker. And once he's done with his questions, there will be blood on the floor. They actually use that metaphor, blood on the floor. After attending the first few seminars, I really couldn't see it. His comments seemed insightful and helpful. Perhaps he's mellowed, I thought. But later, I worked very closely with Bruce for several years on two big projects. Project in the combat stress and PTSD in Vietnam veterans, and a large project on the measurement of major stressful life events. And as I worked with him closely for all those years, it became crystal clear that bloodshed was never and could never be his aim. He cared so very deeply about each and every fellow, and his criticisms were entirely intended to help them do their best work. In fact, that's virtually a quote. He often said explicit to me, "I just want everyone to do their best work." And this is so, I've been personal for now, but this is where I want to reiterate everything that people have said up till now. But we've talked a lot about the intellectual rigor and the process of researching and how that got into us. But I don't think that would have worked as well if it wasn't for the emotional part. And I'm touching on what Ezra said at the beginning. He cared. It mattered. When someone left the PET program and had a great project or got a grant, he was proud. He really did see this us as his intellectual children. But like real parents of children, he loved us. It's also true that all that I want everyone to do their best work, he applied that to himself as well. And that's a whole nother set of stories about that rigor. But one piece of advice he gave exemplifies what he was all about when it came to the research enterprise. One time he said to me, always send your papers to the very best journals, because there you'll get the most useful comments for improving them. So he had no interest in getting things out. His only interest was in getting them right. So Bruce really was the consummate scholar. And like most scholars, he was also a wonderful teacher. Like Sharon, I'll miss him terribly. Thank you.
Thanks, Blake. Nancy Solar.
Hi. So it's a privilege to be here with my pet family, who I have not kept up with as much as I should have. And it's a privilege to say a few words in the memory of Bruce, a man who deeply shaped the way all of us obviously think and work and teach. As everybody said, Bruce is beyond being just a mentor. He was a quiet force of excellence, the kind of person who just raised the standard in every room just by being in it. He led by example, demanding perfection by modeling it in a way that you wanted to live up to him. What set Bruce apart and what truly defined him was his meticulousness. He had an extraordinary gift for noticing the smallest detail in a way that revealed how much those details mattered. Whether it was research design or data integrity or phrasing of a single sentence, Bruce believed that precision wasn't optional. It was foundational. He had the kind of reverence for accuracy that he passed on to all of us. And I see now in this room, standing among Bruce's mentees, many of you were my mentors. Most of you who just spoke were people who've guided my career. Early in my career, when I thought something was close enough, one of you would sometimes gently, always firmly push me to do better. And I always knew what was behind that push was Bruce's voice too. He didn't just teach us to do better work, he inspired us to want to do better work. And he made us want to pass that ethic on to our own students. So that's what I do now, especially today when students are navigating a world of constant information at an impossible pace. I find myself channeling Bruce, encouraging them to slow down, to dig deeper, to double check, and to take care of the little things. Because as Bruce showed us, it's the little things are never really little. They're the foundations of trust, of quality, of integrity in everything we do. Bruce's legacy certainly isn't just in the papers that he published or the projects that we've all spoken about. It's that he taught us to think. He taught us to teach. His influence shows up in our habits and in the quiet moments of decision-making that ripple outward through every student that we now mentor, every student that they will soon mentor too. Bruce helped us to be better stewards of our work and our values. We're calling upon these qualities now in these difficult times, and I'll always be grateful for Bruce's influence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Richard Neugebauer? Richard, if you are muted, if you could unmute. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. It's first of all, Catherine, thank you so much for arranging, and Sharon too, for arranging this get together. I'm really kind of overwhelmed by a number of different feelings. First, of course, missing Bruce. In fact, as I was putting some thoughts together for this talk, I somehow forgot that Bruce was not going to be at the meeting. And so I always had him as a presence while I was writing these sentences, which was not surprising, I guess, but it was strange and actually very nice. But also, I've learned so much from this meeting itself um, that I don't want to get too personal about this, but um, I never realized how rich a life each person in the pet program, was living and continued to live. I mean, after all, in a way, I'm older than most of you, I think, except by maybe John DeFigurito. And so my academic career, even what I had been formed as historian, was very different from your approach. And it was like you were already, in a sense, to be formed by Bruce's intellect and his kindness and his goals, whereas I was already formed in some sense. But having said that, the first meeting with him really summarizes everything that he meant to me. When I arrived to see him, I was completing a PhD in European history, and I had studied a court in England that handled the mentally ill in the 16th and 17th centuries. And since I had a population of people, somebody on the downtown campus suggested that I contact Bruce Dohrenwend. First of all, the name Dohrenwend was odd to me. Of course, then I realized that as a Neugebauer, it shouldn't be odd to me at all. Um, at the first meeting, though, I think I was sort of transformed. I mean, I decided to complete my degree in history, but then I immediately switched to epidemiology and have remained in epidemiology ever since. I mean, I've pursued a somewhat different area than many of you have. And as most of you know, I'm now working or have worked a lot in Africa. Um, but it, I'm changed. Sounds like um, a mystical experience, but my essence was sort of changed by meeting Bruce. And the most important thing about him, and several people have talked about this, I sat down and I described to him the work I was doing. And of course, it wasn't in his area because I described historical work. But he listened immensely closely and carefully. And that was quite a different experience for me than I encountered on the downtown campus in the history department. It was his care. It was, I can't explain it exactly. He was so intensely caring and concentrated and focused, which I had never actually experienced before. And that sort of won me over. And of course, over the years, I came to not only respect him, but love him as well and feel loved by him, which I think was also important for me and obviously for the other people here. Um, I've run out of my material. I didn't put it in front of me, but this this meeting has been immensely important to me in ways that I can't really go into. And Catherine Douglas, can she hear me? Yeah. I wanted to say something. I mean, after all, I met Bruce in 1974 for the first time. And of course, I've, seen him and talked with him for many years since your marriage. Bruce is now a much happier person and a much more sort of relaxed and giving person than when I met him, which I, of course, attribute to you. I just wanted to say that because it's been wonderful. I mean, our brief conversations have been wonderful over the years. And I thought, I mean, this is something that should be said to you, and I've done it. Thank you all, by the way.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you, Catherine.
So just a note on timeline, we're now shifting into the 2000s, into the last decade. And so we'll now hear from a couple more recent pet fellows, starting with Catherine Ornstein.
Thanks. Thanks everyone. And thanks for making me feel like I'm the young person around by being the more recent fellow. I don't get to experience that too much anymore. Like everyone else here, I wouldn't be here without or where I am today without Bruce D's impact. And I would just say, I don't really have many personal stories because I was terrified of Bruce D. And I only referred to him as Bruce D. And I was terrified for no good reason, but I was. But I still learned from him. And I'll go back to sort of the very first talk I gave at Penn, which I think was about 2006. And I know what it was. I know what it was called. I don't have a copy of it, but it was called "The Lives and Deaths of the Homebound." And Bruce D was there, of course, in his seat. And I was terrified, but although he was smiling and kind, and there was no reason for that. But I talked about individuals who are unable to leave their home and trying to understand more about them and their experiences and their families and their experiences at the end of life. I had really cool pictures and I was really prepared. Unlike now when I'm like scribbling on things, I had like rehearsed forever. I talked about depression a lot because, you know, it was pet and they liked that sort of stuff. And Bruce D, and then I just waited. I waited for the Bruce D question. That was the entire goal of the talk, really, was to like wait for what he was going to say. Um, and he, of course, kindly smiled and you know, he said, and again, I was just all over the place. I was telling him every idea I had and all these things. And he said, you know, if you could really show that there was a new onset depression after an individual stopped leaving the house, well, like that would be something. Like, could you find a way to do that? Now, I could barely process anything he said. Probably like, you know, Carrie took notes for me because I couldn't even like take it in any way. And he smiled and I tried to answer in some way. Now, the reason I tell this story is because 20 years later, I'm still asking these same questions about the homebound. And what Bruce taught me is about perseverance. And I had a lot of questions there, and I was able to hone in on them. I'm still honing in on them. You know, are they isolated? Who cares for them? And this depression issue, very complicated. Still working on it. And in fact, you know, my most cited paper I've ever done is literally like a population study on who is homebound and how they get there. And I've had many students trying to work on this very issue today and really struggling to tease things apart. And I still am working on it. And you know, I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of more so what I also learned from Bruce D. Even though I was terrified of him and could barely speak to him, probably ran away when I saw him at the pool sometimes. Is that when people ask me about my work and when students come to me and I talk to them, um, I'm very available for them and I really work with them on it. You know, just this week I had someone talk to me about they're interested in diabetes and how people who are homebound or receive any care for their diabetes. And, you know, I love it. I love to talk to them about how they can handle that next question. And I specifically recognize when the students are terrified. You know, I know those students, I can see it, and I try to be as kind as possible. And I always worry, you know, I hope I'm not terrifying anyone no matter what, but I'm always aware that can be. And I just want to thank Bruce D for teaching me that, even though I didn't really get to ask him directly about many things that I probably should have. So thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. John Pamplin?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's really special to be able to be here and be a part of this today. I joined PET in 2015 as a pre-doctoral fellow. The structure, I think, was a little bit different then. So, you know, we had Ezra as the director. Sharon kind of played this role as this training director. And Bruce D kind of had his same seat, but he was very much the Godfather influence, right? You walked in and you knew that's the Godfather of Pet right there. And at least the way I experienced those seminars, and many people in my cohort, maybe they will experience this as well. there were two questions that you had to be prepared for. The Bruce question, the Bruce D question towards the early end. And if there was time at the end, actually the Sharon question. So Sharon, you very much have continued on this Bruce D legacy because we were all petrified about what very kind things Sharon was going to say that was going to completely unravel everything you thought about what you just presented. And it's through meetings like this that's so clear to me that, oh yes, that is clearly the Bruce D legacy moving forward. The experience of Pet during that time and why we all were so excited to have this opportunity despite the fears because of the adage iron sharpens iron. And you knew that you were going to come out of it such a better scholar. And frankly, I think during my time in the pre-doctoral program here in the department, there was a quiet envy among the non-Pet doctoral students because I think they really could tell that there was this different element of training that those of us who were coming through this program received. And so for me, I too, like many others who mentioned, had this fear of the Bruce D interaction. It was mainly mentored through this kind of the whispers from the Pet fellows from before, and you kind of heard about like, okay, well, sure, in the comments we received in the seminars, we received what we thought was maybe a more mellow Bruce D, but you thought that you were always, maybe one wrong step away from kind of receiving that sharp tongue. And so when I did my dissertation, I had an internal committee, Lisa Bates and Carrie Keys and Ezra Susser. And I remember circulating my first full draft around, and I'll never forget Carrie's comments to me. She says, so I just want to be clear, you have this part here about major life stressors and social stress, and you're going to present this in PET in front of Bruce D. I really think you might want to revisit this work a bit. And I went home and I probably lost sleep for a week. And I was like, I clearly don't know what I'm talking about. I tried to put some stuff together. I tried to fluff it up, zhuzh it up, all these things. I presented my presentation. I actually think, oddly enough, when I presented in PET, I think Bruce D actually couldn't attend that day. But when I actually had my external proposal defense, Bruce D made it. He came. And sure enough, he was respectful of time, but he had a quiet litany of questions for me that I did my best to handle. And at the end of it, I received an invitation to come meet with him in his office. And when I tell you it was like being called to the principal's office, this was now the second time I was losing sleep. And so I went to that meeting, and Bruce D had a stack of papers that he had printed out for me, both on his own papers, but also work by Brown and Harris. He wanted me to have a full spectrum of the work that has been done conceptualizing social stress and the ways it was done. And we had a great conversation. And he sent me about my way. And I was dedicated. I'm going to dig into it. I'm going to read every paper. I'm going to study it. I spent so much time. And where I landed for my dissertation, I did the best of what I could with data that was available to me. And I spent every way I could to try to justify the decisions and rationalize it. And at the end of the day, it wasn't the perfect measure of how I knew Bruce D would do it, but it was, we're all at the mercy of the limitations around us. So when I did my dissertation defense, prepared to stand on the decisions I made, knowing that they may not be 100% what Bruce D would want, I defended successfully, and then I saw in my inbox I had an email from Bruce D, and my heart dropped. And I thought they're going to take my dissertation away. And I have it up, and it just says, I was glad to be at your virtual dissertation presentation yesterday. I thought you gave an expert description of the detailed analyses of such matters as religiosity and other candidates for modifier and mediator roles. Congratulations. All best wishes for a really good experience at NYU, which is where I went for my postdoc. And it was that same aha moment that many of you have experienced, that this was never about blood. It was always about making you the best you could be. And I'm just so proud to be a testament of that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. Now we're turning in our program to some of Bruce's colleagues to reflect on the experience of working with Bruce, not just as a Pet Fellow, but also as a fellow colleague and researcher. So we'll start with Pat Shrout.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here in a different perspective. As a 26-year-old job applicant, I met Bruce in the spring of 1976 when he was already renowned for his trailblazing work on social stress and community mental health. In the early 1970s, Bruce, in collaboration with his wife and colleague Barbara Dohrenwend, were challenging the field of psychiatric epidemiology to obtain better measures of distress, psychopathology, and sources of distress. They were determined to document rigorously the impact of adversity on mental health, arguing that findings that were based on treated cases of psychopathology were biased. They obtained NIMH funding in 1964 for a 25-year program of research called Measures of Untreated Psychiatric Disorder. This productive collaboration led to the publication of the important book, Social Status and Psychological Disorder, A Causal Inquiry, in 1969, and to Bruce's promotion to full professor in psychiatry at Columbia in 1970 at the age of 42. In 1975, they heard from NIMH reviewers that they needed someone trained in psychometrics for their project. Bruce and Barbara decided to partner with Professor Joe Fleiss in biostatistics to recruit an entry-level assistant professor who would work on their grant and to teach basic biostatistics courses in the School of Public Health. They got me. Although I was trained in psychometrics, I was totally ignorant of the theory and issues of social psychiatry. They put me to work documenting the quality of new survey measures of symptoms of various mental disorders, which they called PERI, the Psychiatric Epidemiology Research Instrument. The psychometric work was familiar to me, but the rigor of their community sampling was brand new. They used a previously drawn health survey sample of 2,600 New York residents to select a stratified sample that was balanced in terms of 3 ethnic racial groups: Blacks, Puerto Ricans, and non-Puerto Rican whites, and 3 levels of education of the head of household. They interviewed their sample 3 times, 2 initial surveys 2 weeks apart, and a 1-year follow-up. This sample allowed us to examine many aspects of the psychometrics of the 25 scales that they had devised, as well as the ethnic and social class variation that was so central to Bruce and Barbara's substantive interest. During the years of my work with Bruce and Barbara on this project, they treated me as a respected junior colleague. Remember, I was 26, not as a graduate student. In fact, their graduate students knew much more about psychiatric epidemiology than I did. Bruce would suggest that I would read a number of papers and books if, quote, I was interested. He would leave them on my desk. He would also point out that some of the weekly speakers at the PET seminar might be of special interest. He did not, however, pressure me to attend PET regularly, and he respected the fact that I had obligations as a biostatistics faculty member that were separate from my commitment to his project. His mentoring style included both deep involvement in his work and independent thinking on my part. I can't list all the many lessons I've learned from Bruce, but here are some standouts, and these are consistent with what other people have said. One is to work on research topics that you love and are committed to, because then it's not work. Another is to check that your chosen interest is actually important to the field and to the world. A third is to be ready to commit to a research design that is informative, even if it's very challenging, if nearly impossible to execute. At a more mundane level, I learned from Bruce that holding weekly research meetings with my students helped us set goals and to learn from each other's experiences. Finally, I must say, in my 49 years that I've known Bruce, I've learned what a great friend he was and how much joy he had for life. I also deeply appreciate him introducing us, Jane Hansen, my wife, and I, to his just incredible wife, Kathy Douglas. So, like many people have said, Bruce was one of a kind, and he will always be with me and with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Tom Yeager?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yep, you're
Um,
good.
The other speakers have spoken so well about Bruce's intellectual integrity, his respect for them, his interest and care for those he was a mentor to, and his desire to expand the field through the PET program. I first met Bruce, I think 1972. I joined his project, worked for a couple of years, maybe 3 years, kept in touch with him and came back, I think 2002, and worked for him and with him for as long as he was able to work, even after my job at Columbia ended. Um, but I thought I would just briefly describe the last paper he wrote, and which is the last paper I wrote with him, which was about harm to civilians and prisoners committed by American soldiers in Vietnam. I was very glad to be able to take part in an investigation of something involving the effect on the Vietnamese, because although the research on Vietnam veterans, we did a considerable amount of it based on a large survey done in the 80s. It was rightly concerned with the problems of Vietnam veterans and the effects of the war on them, sometimes positive, often negative. But I myself had gone to graduate school in order to avoid the Vietnam War, and I was glad to give some kind of mild reparation to the people of Vietnam by taking part in this. As usual, Bruce was responsible for the hypotheses in this paper, and as always, he likes simple, direct ones where you get a simple, clear answer. And it was to compare the effects of the nature of the war as represented by a comprehensive measure of combat exposure that we had developed, and the possible effects of psychopathic personality as well. That was in the words of a Army psychiatrist named William Gull. We looked at antisocial personality in childhood, a simple list of items on the theory that that might give a predisposition to. Well, the question is, would the soldiers that committed what we did not call atrocities because we didn't know the exact uh, nature of the events in each case, but harm to civilians and prisoners. And so we compared these two effects, and not too surprisingly, anyway, to me, well, it was the effect of the war that won the contest, that had a much stronger effect, and the predisposition of antisocial personality had a very weak effect. It had some effect on. We looked at harm to prisoners, harm to civilians, and harm to both. And the antisocial variable did have some effect on harm to both, but the combat exposure was much bigger, had a much bigger effect. So I'll just leave it at that. I appreciated having worked with Bruce for so many years. And as I always say, although I did sometimes drop into the PET program, my training was entirely on the job training. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. Jean and Steve Stellman?
Sure. I'll start. It's a privilege to be here as not only not a member of PET, but not even in the epidemiology department. So thanks for inviting and giving me this opportunity, and good to see so many faces I haven't seen in a long time. I had the pleasure of getting to know Bruce pretty well in at least two very different ways. One was when Keristin Conan was at PET working with Bruce during her training years. I don't exactly remember how the connection was made, but she was and is, of course, a gem. And we authored several papers together on the second follow-up of our now 35-year study of American Legionnaire Vietnam veterans. Bruce was a co-author on a paper we published on the startling consistency of veterans reporting of their combat exposure over decades. And these papers are still cited frequently, and Bruce provided many useful insights into a survey that we did of military women who were a part of the Women's Vietnam Veteran Memorial Cohort. His was a wonderful mind. But the second way in which I had the pleasure of spending time with Bruce was as members of the audience of the Dessoff Choir, because Steve and Kathy sang together for at least 2 decades, and we were both faithful attendees. And I always looked forward to sitting somewhere near him and munching on one of those unhealthy snacks afterwards. And I thought of Bruce the other day when I emptied all of my books and Agent Orange and herbicides out, finally threatening to write something, and stacked them haphazardly on some of the chairs, and instantly Bruce's office flashed into my mind, and as further evidence about how unforgettable memories get implanted in your brain. Steve?
Okay, thank you. It was an honor and privilege to have known and worked with Bruce, both on research on several departmental committees, especially doctoral committees, where I got to know dozens of men and women who today are leaders in their fields. About a decade ago, I was tasked with developing a fresh master's degree curriculum for chronic disease epidemiology. Now, I'm mainly a cancer person, but I knew that mental health had to be an essential element. I was fortunate to be able to draw on faculty and participants in the PET program for guidance, often as guest lecturers and occasionally as TAs. Bruce's pioneering work on post-traumatic stress disorder was a solid foundation on which much of our work on Vietnam veterans rested. And this has had a real-world impact that we couldn't have imagined. To begin, Bruce Link mentioned the psychiatric epidemiology research instrument, or Perry scales. Their impact was so immediately compelling that we incorporated them into the veteran cohort that Jean mentioned that we started in 1983. But their strong adverse impact of these 5 measures 50 years after the war is going to be reported in a paper that'll be published next month in the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine. As Tom Yeager intimated, during the early post-Vietnam years, there were skeptics who raised doubts that veterans could honestly report the horrors that they experienced. Bruce's advice, guidance, and active collaboration were indispensable. The work that Keristin Cohn and Gene Stellman and I did to establish reliability and stability over time of combat reporting. But that was only the first hurdle. It took years, but the arduous task of coaxing the VA into recognizing and treating combat-related PTSD and other mental health disorders for millions of veterans was ultimately successful, and much of that success is due to Bruce Dohrenwend's methodologically rigorous work, as Tom just mentioned. Unfortunately, there are always fresh disasters, each with its own unique features. The New York City Health Department cohort study of World Trade Center survivors, we drew heavily on Bruce's principles and methods in developing research instruments, getting them into the hands of our 70,000 research study participants, and analyzing the research findings. And this ultimately led to several hundred research publications that were the basis for compensation and treatment for many thousands of affected individuals. So those are just some of the many legacies by which Bruce Dohrenwend will be remembered. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Mark Weiser, is Mark here? I looked for his name on the... Mark, if you're here under a different name, please unmute. Hearing nothing, maybe we'll skip over Mark for now, but if he comes back, we will make sure that he is included. So maybe right now we'll move to Roberto Luis Fernandez.
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I met Bruce in 1999 when I had recently arrived at Columbia, or NISP, both, from Puerto Rico, where I'm from, as an assistant professor. We met at a presentation on PTSD at PNS by psychiatrist and neuroimager Doug Bremner. I screwed up my courage to approach Bruce. I told him completely honestly that the field of psychiatry has still not gotten beyond the issues he outlined in his 1966 article in the American Sociological Review entitled Social Status and Psychological Disorder, an issue of substance and an issue of method. That tour de force of an article indicates to me the degree to which the validity of psychiatric epidemiology findings is challenged by the differential effects that cultural, structural, and situational elements have on our various assessment methods. I felt, and to some degree still feel, that descriptive psychiatry faces a major obstacle in arriving at a diagnosis because the interpretation of symptoms depends so heavily on a person's subjectivity and the diagnostician's ability to interpret it faithfully and fully. Once you introduce on top of idiosyncratic individual variation and appraisal the element of collective cultural variation and appraisal, the problem becomes even larger. Coming back to 1999, Bruce said very little. He just smiled his gentle smile and invited me to come collaborate with him. I never found out what he thought of my gushing fanboy statement. So I joined the Dohrenwend team for several years, working on the National Vietnam Veterans Readjustment Study, the one that Tom mentioned. I joined him and them in writing 4 articles and 3 chapters, all of them on PTSD among veterans of the Vietnam theater. One article was particularly important to me. The article focused squarely on the issue about which I had approached him, the challenge to diagnostic validity of variability in assessment methods. Our article tested one of the hypotheses that Bruce had identified in his article on social status in 1966. The role of cultural variation in expressiveness of psychiatric symptoms as a potential explanation for higher prevalence of mental health conditions, and the effect of various assessment methods in clarifying or obscuring this role. Our work, which was really carefully step-by-step guided by Bruce, showed that greater cultural expressiveness played a part in Latino Vietnam veterans' higher persistence of war-related PTSD. But this effect was restricted to self-report diagnostic instruments, particularly among Puerto Rican veterans, not the clinician-administered SCID. We concluded that cultural expressiveness did not account for higher persistence of PTSD in the SCID-diagnosed Latino sample. My direct work with Bruce wound down around 2007, except for a brief collaboration, including with that project that Tom was mentioning a few years later, when my work in NISP at Psychiatric Institute ramped up. But I always appreciated what I learned from him. And many people here have said many of the things that I would have liked to say. But the 2 things that I was particularly struck about in preparing these comments were his scientific integrity, which has been mentioned, and the value he placed on a clear a priori hypothesis formulation. Bruce was, in the Spanish term, insobornable, that is to say, unbribable. If you presented an option that wasn't entirely kosher, maybe you didn't know that it wasn't, he got this look on his face that I interpreted as, you want to do what? Everything had to be by the book, as if your good name was writing on every analysis and interpretation, as of course it was. And he insisted on spelling out the hypothesis for every test beforehand. Results were confirmed or not confirmed. There was no waffling allowed. How do you know what are valid results if you don't formulate the alternatives clearly beforehand? Those lessons are very, very helpful still to me, and as somebody starting out there in the profession, they were even better. I was very lucky to be exposed to a beacon of scientific and methodological integrity like Bruce early in my career. It was an honor to work with him.
Thank you, Roberto. Judy Richmond? You're on mute. Oh, still on mute. Let me see.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first, I'd like to thank the organizers of this. As others have said, I feel very nostalgic for being here and remembering all my experiences in PET and working with Bruce. When I was a graduate student in the Columbia Sociology Department in the 1970s, A friend recommended that I take Bruce's course in social psychiatry. I did and totally fell in love with the field and afterwards entered Pitt. Before then, I had felt kind of alienated in the Columbia Sociology Department, especially due to the highly sexist atmosphere at the time. By contrast, Pitt provided not only an intellectually stimulating environment, but a place where women were equally respected for their brains rather than just for their other attributes. In Pitt, I was able to continue my initial interest in changing gender roles by also exploring their impact on mental health, with Bruce as my dissertation sponsor. A few years after Pitt, the major locale of my life shifted to Chicago after meeting my husband, who was already tenured in an academic position there. The job market wasn't so great at the time, and Bruce suggested that I contact a psychiatrist at UIC who had recently consulted with him on epidemiologic research that he was involved with, Joseph Flaherty, and that led to the rest of my career in the UIC psychiatry department. My NIH-funded studies there were all inspired by Bruce's groundbreaking contributions to the field of psychiatric epidemiology. First, his argument that a focus on the salience of gender in understanding the social etiology of deleterious mental health outcomes necessitated the study of both male and female modes of expressing distress, which led me to focus on substance abuse outcomes. My friends at the time from Pitt were mainly interested in depression. To be honest, I was too, but it seems like it would be easier to get NIH funding in alcohol research, and I needed to get tenure. Second, Bruce's development of the stress paradigm for understanding the differential distribution of psychopathology in society led me to explore my interest in sexual harassment by viewing it as a particular type of workplace stressor that engendered distress and the self-medication of distress with alcohol and other substances. Thirdly, in the midst of engaging in this longitudinal workplace cohort study, the events of 9/11/01 occurred. When I read the accounts of the profound levels of distress that people experience from these events, it led me to think about macro level stressors as, as important as the micro level stressors that most of the research had focused on. This research led me to subsequent macro level stressor studies, first looking at the effects of the Great Recession, and finally, my interest in explaining Case and Deaton's well-known findings showing that American white working class middle-aged individuals manifested increased morbidity rates related to substance abuse and suicide, in contrast to previous findings generally depicting decreasing mortality rates in advanced industrial societies. In conclusion, I want to thank Bruce for providing a rich theoretical foundation and the methodological tools that enabled me to explore a variety of important social phenomena of interest to me throughout my career. And also thanks to the incredible experience that I had in Pitt, and thanks to Bruce Dohrenwend for developing Pitt. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Karisten?
Thank you, Carrie. And it's really wonderful to be here today. And I feel like this is a little bit like this is my life in research because there's so many people I could speak about who influenced me through Pat and through Bruce. I came to Pat with a PhD in clinical psychology. I had done my PhD in clinical psychology because I wanted to be a therapist. I thought I was going to be a private practice therapist. That was my goal. And I fell in love with research in graduate school, and my mentor, Michael Lyons, was a Pat Fellow. And then my internship supervisor, Mary Lynn Cloytra, was also a PET fellow. So they both pushed me to apply to PET, and I really didn't know what it was, except I was looking for something more. I had been very focused on treating people with trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. And I kept seeing people at the end of a trajectory of adversity and suffering and thinking that there's got to be something else I can do. There's got to be another way to think about that. And I still remember when I took my first epidemiology class at Columbia, and it completely blew my mind. Mary Beth Terry taught it, Epi 1, and it just blew my mind. And that's what I can say about my PET experience. So one Bruce story. So I interviewed with Bruce for PET, and of course we sort of our interest jive because I was passionate about PTSD, and he was doing work with, and I had worked at the Boston VA with veterans, and so we had a lot of common interests. And then when I came as a PET fellow, I had one of my dissertation papers that was just ready to be submitted, and I was like, he said, "Oh, I'm happy to let me read what you're doing." So I innocently gave him my paper. I was so proud of this paper. It was finished. My advisors had looked at it and commented on it. And then he asked to meet with me, he hands it to me, and it looked like someone had bled all over the paper. He had his red ink and he'd page, like there was not a line that he didn't have a question or cross out or rewrite on. And I wanted to burst out crying, but I sat there and I listened to him, and I didn't cry till I got into the hallway. And I cried and I revised, and he helped improve the paper. But what I realized and what really came home when I was thinking about this memory to me is what he taught me was that my ideas were important and worth his time, and worth the kind of time that, frankly, I don't really have to give to my students these days, where like line by line edits and comments. And I think that was one of his, I have his intellectual legacy, so many things, but I think that was one of the core legacies, was making me feel like my ideas were of value and important and worth putting out there. In terms of PET itself, there were so many influences on me. I had the memories of being, I still have been more nervous speaking in PET than in any other context, including contexts where there's hundreds of people. And it was always terrified of, well, honestly, of Bruce and Sharon, because Sharon could, you could think you had something finished, and then she would pick the thing, and it was like the thread, and it would all fall apart. And one of the students who was an epi student but wasn't a PET fellow, Andrew Ratana, we still, when he has a paper, we still talk about, now what would Sharon say about the paper? I'm not going to go through everyone here, but I think all of these people are part of Bruce's legacy. So I want to make a few comments about folks who are here today. I will always remember taking Bruce Link's class in psychiatric epidemiology. And one of the points he made in the class, which as a clinical psychologist blew my mind, was he said, okay, here is what we know about psychiatric epidemiology. Here's what we know about how common mental disorders are. If we believe this, and these are reasons we should believe this single individual, finding everyone an individual therapist, the medical model for addressing this problem is never going to work. And we need to think about what are the structural and the population level solutions. And that is something I still think, I probably think about that almost every day in my work today. So I want to thank Bruce for that. I want to thank Jean and Steve Stellman, who took me in on my postdoc, and working with you was one of the best experiences of my life on the Vietnam veteran study and the women in Vietnam study. And also just the opportunity to work with Tom and Roberto and everyone on the Vietnam veterans work, which was really really important for my career. And then just finally, I thought Bruce would appreciate this. So just in the last few weeks, I shared his paper, which was on the Psychological Bulletin Review, Inventorying Stressful Life Events as Risk Factors for Psychopathology Towards Resolution of the Problem of Intercategory Variability. I shared it with folks in my group, because even though we use the dreaded checklists in my research, we also, technology has now allowed us to easily collect narratives of life events in a way that was actually really challenging before. And there's a group of folks who've gotten really interested in using Bruce, translating Bruce's methods with AI to enable us to use a lot of his coding systems on the narratives. And I just feel like I don't know what he would have think of it, but I think he would have appreciated the attempt. And us being able to address now with technology some of the things that were barriers to actually doing some of the work he was really interested in. So thank you, Carrie, and thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. The problems of intercategory heterogeneity is still on the Psych Epi reading list. I'll have Bruce Link know, and yeah, so we're still having students read that paper every year. Nicole Gersberg, I know you wanted to say a few things. I wanted to give it, since we have a few minutes.
Amazing. Can you guys see me okay?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. So I was not officially a part of PET. I'm always a little bit of the odd one out in these calls, but I think in a wonderful way. So I started working with Bruce when I was 16 years old. I did a science research program through my high school. And so I emailed a number of professors out of the blue with an interest in PTSD. Though I didn't know it at the time, it stemmed from a family history. I am the grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors. So PTSD runs in my family line, and also an interest in research was a way for me to explore that both personally and also ultimately gave me the opportunity to explore a skill set which is core to my role, which is not in research. I actually work at Google in strategy and operations, but I credit the career that I've had and so many of my successes and professional and personal growth to Bruce. In so many ways, I've known Bruce for half my life. And I honestly loved him. I love him. I know for those, all of you know Bruce quite well, and he wasn't always, a fuzzy guy, I would say. But the way that he put so much time and effort into me, a high school student, I ultimately worked with him, high school, college, post grad. So we worked together 10 total years. All this to say, I will miss Bruce so much. He's been such an incredible mentor to me, the best mentor I ever could have wished for. And I'm grateful to him for helping me grow as a human, grow as a researcher in an applied manner, and just for giving me an opportunity, one that would ultimately shape my trajectory and my life. I have so much gratitude for him and for this community. It's amazing to just be surrounded by so many incredible people who were moved by Bruce. So thank you for including me in today.
Thanks so much. And now I'll turn it to Kathy Douglas to close us out. You're on mute.
Okay, I think I'm on. Of course, I'm enormously touched by everyone's remarks today. You were all Bruce's treasured colleagues and friends over many, many years. And clearly, you and he learned from and with each other. He was rich in all the ways that matter. It may not surprise you that Bruce could never actually envision departing from Columbia. Therefore, it's my great pleasure to announce that Bruce established 2 new endowed professorships with the goal of supporting the research and teaching of scholars for many generations to come. First, in 1994, he endowed the Barbara and Bruce Dohrenwend Professorship in Socio-Medical Sciences. Second, in 2022, he endowed the Bruce P. Dohrenwend professorship in psychiatric epidemiology. Specifically, he intended this professorship to be held by an early career faculty member who is committed to teaching and research on social factors and psychiatric disorders, especially work that investigates the interplay of biological and epidemiological environmental factors, biology and environment. Sound familiar? The first two individuals to hold these named professorships will be announced soon by their departments, and they will begin their tenures July 1, 2025. So, as Bruce wished, he is not departing from Columbia altogether. And now I believe Carrie has the last word. Carrie?
Yes. Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you everyone for taking time out of busy, busy research lives to come together and be in this space together and share our memories of Bruce and his legacy and his mentorship. I want to thank everyone who helped plan this event today, Gerald and Laura and Emma, whose administrative support we could not do with anything without. And just stay in touch. I mean, once you're a pet fellow, like we will chase you down forever. But even independent of that, please stay in touch with us. Like I said, we will continue training psychiatric epidemiologists at Columbia University. And I just hope everyone continues to stay in touch with us and will continue Bruce's legacy within the department and in your own research programs as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.